All right, it is 5:30. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you for joining our virtual public information meeting on the Blue Line Rapid Transit Project. My name is Jordan Patterson and I'm IndyGo's Special Programs Manager. And I want to welcome you to tonight's meeting. And joining me are Jennifer Pierce, IndyGo's Chief Development Officer, and Will Tolbert, our design team's project manager and supervising engineer with WSP. They will be tonight's presenters. You'll hear much more from them in a few minutes. First, I want to explain why we are here tonight. The objective of IndyGo's public involvement process is to support proactive public engagement at all stages of planning and project development. And as IndyGo progresses towards 60% completion of the design for the upcoming Blue Line Rapid Transit line, members of the state legislature have asked us to evaluate a reconfigured design for segment 1. And that's the stretch of the Blue Line from the Indianapolis International Airport to Holt Road. Tonight, we will detail the impacts of these configurations and share an analysis and budgetary impacts of the reconfigured design elements. And while these scenarios exceed our project budget, this is an opportunity for continued transparency with the community as we plan service that meets our riders' needs on this shared journey towards stronger mobility options for our city. And our meeting agenda is very simple. We will share the analysis and impacts from segment 1 configurations, and then afterward, we will hold a Q&A session. I do have a few quick housekeeping items to pass along, and then we will get started. To keep inquiries organized, we ask you to submit your questions and comments through the Q&A feature. This can be found by hovering your mouse over the Zoom window. You should see a toolbar with a prominent Q&A button. Clicking this button will open a submit a question prompt. Please note, your questions and comments will not be visible to the group unless or until a member of our team responds. Also, we want to point out that the chat feature will not be used tonight. We welcome all attendees to submit questions and comments using the Q&A feature at any time during the meeting, but verbal responses will not be given until the Q&A session after the presentation. And we recognize that all questions may not be addressed during our limited meeting time this evening. We certainly want to be respectful of your time, which we know is extremely valuable during this holiday season. We thank you for engaging in this process. But to that end, IndyGo takes public comments and suggestions very seriously. To log a formal public comment, please contact our customer service at 317-635-3344 or submit a comment online at indigo.net/contact us. Please note that while shared feedback is acknowledged this evening, only inquiries and comments submitted to our customer service team or online form will be counted as official public comment, as it will be formally logged into our database. And we put a helpful little QR code in the corner of the screen, so you can go ahead and get that ready should you choose to submit a formal comment. And lastly, we want to remind everyone to abide by our public meeting code of conduct and decorum, which is intended to promote an environment of fairness, courtesy, and respect for different points of view. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Jennifer and Will to present the configurations.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Can you hear me and see the screen all right? We good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, thank you everyone so much for being here tonight. We have a big group and I'm really appreciative of you all being here to take the time to learn more about the project and the work that we put into the design process. Many of you may know, and Jordan just pointed it out, that we're progressing towards that 60% milestone. What that means is that we are getting close to being 2/3 of the way towards our final design. So our next plan, getting my tongue tied here, the next plan deliverable will be submitted to us by our engineers this spring. So as we're moving forward towards that, we're at the same time working on the environmental analysis. The environmental analysis is something that's required by the National Environmental Policy Act. You'll hear us talk about NEPA. Our NEPA document is expected to be complete and submitted to the Federal Transit Administration for approval this coming summer. Under our current schedule, construction of the Blue Line would start in mid to late 2024, and operations would be expected to begin in early 2027. So as we move along this timeline and get towards that final design point, we are going to have more opportunities to reach out to you. This is kind of an interim step, but there will be several more opportunities for you to provide input and for us to share our progress. I thought I'd back up a little bit because we have so many people here. I'm guessing some of you may be sort of new to our meeting. So I just want to provide a quick overview and refresher so that we all start out on the same page. Many of you probably already know that the Blue Line is really, it's largely is an upgrade to the local Route 8. So the Route 8 is one of our highest ridership routes. It runs along Washington Street from Cumberland on the east side to High School Road on the west, and then down to the airport. That's the Blue Line. Sorry, it's a bit different than the Route 8. But the Blue Line will do that and head down to the airport. It will cover 24 miles and have 37 stations. It will provide high quality transit service to nearly 52,000 people. 31% of those folks are identified as low income and thus really have the greatest potential to benefit from this improved transit access. We also are reaching 94,000 jobs within a short walk of those 37 stations. And so this really is an opportunity for us to connect people to jobs, healthcare, et cetera. The current project budget is $220 million. That does represent an increase from our original project budget. That increase is largely the result of project delays, and those translate into increased material and labor costs and continued deterioration of the already poor infrastructure in this corridor. The majority of that $220 million budget is going towards infrastructure improvements, including pavement, drainage, traffic signals, and pedestrian and bicycle facilities that will all support the new bus rapid transit service. The BRT stations, which will look very similar to the Red Line stations that you see, but they'll have some minor tweaks to address lessons that we've learned specifically related to maintenance and durability. Those stations are estimated to be a little bit under 15% of the overall budget, and vehicles another approximately 15% of the budget. Project development costs are listed here. Those include things like professional services such as engineering, the environmental analysis that's done, legal, construction inspection, construction management. That number also reflects a significant amount for right-of-way acquisitions, most of which are required in order to build sidewalk in places where none exists today. And Will's going to talk a little bit more about that and how that looks for the different configurations. Funding for the Blue Line is coming from a combination of federal and local sources, including the Federal Transit Administration, the City of Indianapolis Department of Public Works, IndyGo, of course, and Federal Highway Administration. As of today, FTA has a cap on their Small Starts contribution. Small Starts is the program that the Federal Transit Administration funds bus rapid transit projects under. So FTA has a cap on that contribution of $100 million. And so any additional increases to our project budget will have to come 100% from local IndyGo income tax or bond revenues because we have hit that cap. And anything over is on us. So why such a significant level of investment and why on this particular corridor? Bus rapid transit, as I mentioned, is an upgrade to the service that we're providing today on the Route 8. It's also part of our commitment to provide safe, reliable, and accessible mobility options that will improve our community quality of life. So like the red and the purple line corridors, this corridor was identified for upgrade to BRT because of its existing high ridership, its ability to connect people to employment. I mentioned all of those jobs along the line. This is one of our strongest employment corridors, and its potential to attract riders and investment. It's a good investment. Under its currently designed configuration, with about 70% of the line operating in dedicated lanes, the Blue Line will provide faster, more frequent transit service to the people that ride it today and to future riders. And we're estimating that it would result in a 25% reduction in transit travel time from those who are using the bus today. It will also provide improved access, as I mentioned, to work, education opportunities, healthcare, healthy food choices, all of the things that positively benefit our local economy. Bus rapid transit in its current configuration also supports transit-oriented development and redevelopment, which also has many positive outcomes for our community, including reducing the cost of living, making efficient use of our scarce resources, lowering pollution by reducing vehicular traffic, and reducing household spending on transportation. So what is bus rapid transit and how is it different from what we're providing on Route 8 now? The Federal Transit Administration, which, as I mentioned, will be providing about 50% of the funding for the project, has a program called the Small Starts Fixed Guideway Program, and it defines BRT as meeting several criteria that I have bulleted here. The majority of the project needs to operate in a separated right-of-way that is dedicated for public transportation. It needs to make a substantial investment in a single route within a defined corridor, which of course we're doing. It has to have defined stations, traffic signal priority for buses. It has to have short headway times, which means that the buses need to come close together, in our case, 10 minutes during the peak hour. And it has to have bi-directional services for a substantial part of weekdays and weekend stays, meaning it can't operate, for instance, like just into the downtown, but it has to be in both directions. We've been working with the FTA for several years under the definition of this program to ensure that the criteria here are met and therefore that we are able to receive that maximum $100 million in federal contribution towards its cost. Because of the condition of much of the infrastructure on Washington Street, especially on the west end of the project that we're talking about tonight, this significant investment is going to benefit not just those who ride the Blue Line, but our entire community. Among the improvements that all of us will benefit from, in addition to improved transit service, are new and replaced sidewalks, improved access for bicyclists, safer pedestrian crossings, new multi-use paths, improved access for people with disabilities, a new roadway surface, improved drainage, and new and upgraded traffic signals. Yeah, you probably also know that we've made an added commitment to use a green fleet for our BRT service. Our battery electric BRT fleet is one way that we're working to responsibly use your tax money to positively benefit the greatest number of people while minimizing negative impacts. So from the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to lowering operating costs and several other things on here, we do continually strive to provide the greatest public benefit with the projects that we do. So for tonight's meeting, as we mentioned, we're going to focus our attention on what we call segment 1. That's the portion of the Blue Line project that is west of Holt Road. It includes Washington Street between Holt Road and High School Road. It also includes High School Road south of Washington Street and parts of Perimeter Parkway that connect the new Infosys campus to FedEx's headquarters and then to the Indianapolis International Airport. A park and ride facility is also part of this segment. It would be provided at the intersection of Washington Street and High School Road. South of Washington Street, BRT is planned to operate in shared lanes, meaning the bus will operate in the same lanes as what we call general purpose traffic, all of us in cars. The current configuration for Washington Street is what we call left lane BAT. BAT stands for bus access and transit, or bus and turn is another way that it's talked about. What it means is that the BRT vehicle would travel in dedicated lanes in the center 2 lanes of Washington Street, and that we would have left turn pockets designed at key locations, including all signalized intersections, at which cars would be able to turn left by driving across a dedicated bus lane. And I know that gets kind of complicated, but Will is going to show you what this looks like a little later in the presentation. Also in the current configuration, stations will be in the center of the roadway, and general purpose traffic, so those of us in cars, will be reduced to 1 lane in each direction on Washington Street in this segment, plus those turn lanes that I mentioned. In this configuration, left turns will only be permitted at signals or at marked left turn lanes. So through numerous public and stakeholder meetings that we've had to date, including large group meetings and smaller one-on-one meetings and everything in between, we've received feedback that falls kind of into several key categories that we've listed here. Number 1, business owners have reached out to us with concerns about how they'll be impacted by restrictions to that left turn access. And our design team has been working to make the design as accommodating as possible without sacrificing safety. And so since that 30% design, since the outreach meetings that we had back when we had got to that 30% design milestone, we've made a number of changes that we think improve the design for all users, adding in some additional left turn pockets and making other engineering tweaks that try to increase that level of access. We've also heard concerns about traffic flow and the ability of Washington Street to handle traffic effectively with only one general purpose traffic lane in each direction. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit more tonight. We've been working with our service planning consultants to identify how the local bus service will be provided west of High School Road on Washington Street and how it's going to connect with the Plainfield Workforce Connector that CERTA operates. And then we've been working with the stakeholders that are very specific there on the very west end, FedEx, Infosys, and the airport, to refine the station locations and how they'll connect with those employment centers and what they will provide for that configuration. So as we proceed towards that 60% design milestone, we are continuously making refinements to the design that are trying to provide the very best benefit for the most people. But we do need to hear about your needs in order to really make that happen effectively. So tonight's meeting, as Jordan said, is intended to share the analyses that our engineers have recently completed regarding alternate lane configurations on Washington Street, and to make sure you all know about the work that our engineers, have been doing in response to requests from the state legislature. These alternate configurations were requested, as I mentioned, because of concerns specifically related to that second bullet under the takeaways, and that's the traffic volumes and flows for general purpose vehicles on Washington Street. But we know that there are trade-offs. I'm sure you all know that there are trade-offs that come with every engineering decision we make. And while changing the lane configuration could make things easier for some, it would also have negative impacts. And so those are the things that we want to share with you tonight and get your feedback on. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Will Tolbert here in a second to share his team's analysis. Will is a professional engineer here in Indianapolis, lived here his entire life, and he leads our design consultant team has been leading it through all of the Blue Line design. He's going to walk through each of the configurations that we've looked at and its pros and cons. As you listen to his presentation, we ask you to consider how each of the configurations would impact you and the greater community and how it fits within the values and priorities that you hold. What's always most helpful to us is when you're able to get really to the root of your concern. So the more that you can share with us the why of your concern, the better we're able to really understand you and address that concern through our design. And so just as I trust Will and his team to do the engineering of the Blue Line for us, I hope you will also trust him and me to hear your feedback and respond with well thought out and trusted engineering solutions. We really do want to hear from you. So I will hand it over to the technical team, in this case, Will Tolbert, to walk through all of that for you. Go for it, Will.
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate that intro. And thanks to everyone else for being here tonight. There's a lot to unpack on segment one. Both what we've looked at and some of the pros, cons of what we looked at. I'm going to try and help visualize some of the things that we've looked at for the group, and hopefully that will be helpful in understanding the process that we've gone through and being able to provide good feedback to our team. So just looking at the map of segment one that's in front of you, what we're going to focus on is really the feedback for the area between Morris Street and Holt Road tonight, and visualizing what we've gone through as far as our process in responding to that feedback and looking at different lane configurations. The airport area, the airport terminal, FedEx and Infosys, those have been pretty concentrated conversations with the stakeholders at the airport itself. And it's a different kind of sub-segment of this segment. So where we've really heard the most feedback and have the most to address is really between that Morris Street and Holt Road section of Washington Street. As you can see, those white circles represent the stations, the station locations: Morris, Lyndhurst, Auburn, Fleming, and Holt Road. So those are the areas that we've looked at in detail. We have looked at the left lane bat configuration that Jennifer mentioned earlier. And then we've looked most recently at 2 other lane configurations: curbside bat and center running bidirectional. And we'll show a visual of those in a second. And then we've also received feedback and looked at some alternative station locations. One is at the Kroger entrance between Lyndhurst and Auburn. So that is essentially would be combining the Lyndhurst and Auburn stations into a single station at that Kroger entrance. And then the other station location alternate station location that we've looked at is, instead of at the Fleming Street intersection itself, moving that station about a block and a half east in front of the Christina Oaks Park, if you're familiar with that location. So, and I will say about those alternative station locations, we have only looked at those in the context of the left lane bat alternative for now. And most of that is just time constraints and needing to look at the full corridor with those 2 alternate configurations, the curbside bat and the center running bidirectional. So we have not looked at alternative station locations in those contexts yet. Let's move to the next slide. So this is kind of a visual of the 3 lane configurations that we've looked at for that stretch of Morris Street to Holt Road. In the upper left is the center running bidirectional configuration, and this has 2 lanes of travel for general purpose traffic in both eastbound and westbound directions. So visualize that this is Washington Street that you're seeing in front of you, even though these are generic drawings. And then in the center lane, the bus operates in each direction, both eastbound and westbound. And obviously, there are hold points along the way. If you're familiar with College Avenue on Red Line, it's a similar section to this. There aren't 2 lanes in each direction on College, but as far as how the bidirectional lane works, if you can visualize College Avenue, that's how it operates. So this is in between stations. You could have an eastbound or a westbound bus occupying that transit only lane, and no general purpose vehicles could occupy that lane. In the top right corner is the curbside bat configuration. And in this case, you'll see kind of the shaded pink area, that shaded or half shaded with the dashes, that represents buses and vehicles being able to share that lane. And the vehicles sharing that lane would have access to businesses and properties along the corridor via right turns. And then all the other general purpose traffic would be in a single lane westbound and eastbound on Washington Street. And then there would be left turn lanes, obviously also included in the center as shown there, for left turn access to side streets and properties along the corridor. And then the lower configuration, the left lane bat, this is the configuration that we have designed to date to 30%. The top 2 we've only looked at up to a 10% design. But the left lane bat is what we designed to 30% back in 2019. And this shows the general purpose traffic in the outside lane of Washington Street. Again, you have the dashed shaded area, which represents buses and turning vehicles being able to use that inside lane. And the turning vehicles are using that lane to then move over to that left turn pocket. So that kind of shows those 3 configurations. And I should note that those configurations definitely represent the area between the stations. So it, at the stations themselves, and we'll look at snapshots of those, there's a different footprint as far as what these configurations mean at station locations. But in between station locations, this is a good representation of what those lane configurations are. And you should note that there are no configurations that we've looked at that are fully mixed traffic lanes, i.e. there's always some kind of dedication for bus lane, whether it's shared with turning vehicles or completely dedicated as in the bidirectional. And the reason that we're not looking at fully mixed traffic alternatives on this corridor is because the level of investment in pavement and sidewalks and drainage that IndyGo and also FTA as a project sponsor would end up investing in this 2-mile section of corridor there needs to be some kind of transit dedicated benefit that goes with the project. And in this case, that means having dedicated space for those transit vehicles. And you would say on the flip side, well, IndyGo has multiple routes that operate in fully mixed traffic lanes all across the city. This is true, but on those routes, IndyGo and FTA has not invested or rehab the pavement or done the drainage design and rehab or sidewalks. So that's the difference between what you see in local routes across the city and what you see in a BRT project on Washington Street here. So just want to explain that up front. The other thing that I'll note about, if we could go back to that slide for just a second, we do have these alternatives that reduce from 2 lanes of traffic to 1 lane of traffic other than turning vehicles on Washington Street. And there was an extensive traffic analysis done pre-pandemic, so from 2018 to 2019, an extensive traffic analysis that showed that the average vehicle delay at all the signalized intersections met city standards, even with a single lane of traffic in each direction at those intersections, also allowing for turning traffic in the transit lanes. And what, so that's acceptable is a very subjective term. So let me put a definition to it. The city standard is basically a level of service or an average delay of 55 seconds or less per vehicle at the intersection. So just helping put that into context, no one would be waiting on average more than 55 seconds at a signalized intersection, whether you're on the side street approach or on the Washington Street approach. And that is in the morning or evening peak hour or rush hour traffic period. So hopefully that helps peel off the subjective label and gives it a defined amount of time to process there. Let's move on to the next slide. Thanks, Jennifer. So this is the left lane back configuration. We talked about that, and I'm going to talk through just some high level pros and cons of this configuration. And since we have the drawing here, let's just go through the colors and what they mean really quick. The red dashed lines indicate this is the bus lane. The blue rectangle is the station platform that you see on the left. This is the intersection of Washington and Lyndhurst, by the way. The green sidewalk is on the north side of Washington, and this would be brand new sidewalk along the north side. And then the yellow cross-hatched area on the south side is an 8-foot multi-use path, which would also be new on the south side of Washington Street. So hopefully that kind of helps visualize all the color that's popping out in this drawing. But want to talk through the pros of the left lane bat. This configuration has the fewest impacts to properties along the corridor. And as we get into some of the other configuration snapshots at the stations, you'll see why. This configuration, this is through a lot of feedback through the process in 2018 and 2019, we're able to use the left lane bat to build in left turn access to side streets and businesses along the corridor that helped mitigate a lot of the concerns that we were hearing through the design process about making sure we're accommodating business access and circulation. And we have continued to work with property owners along the corridor to try and mitigate that. But this configuration allows us to build in some of that left turn access. So that is a pro for this alternative. And then also this is the lowest cost alternative for the corridor. And again, as we get into some of the other lane configuration snapshots, we'll kind of explain why this one is the lowest cost. Let's go to a few of the cons for this configuration. And I'm not listing every pro and con for all configurations. I'm trying to hit the kind of the high notes, the most important ones. One of the cons for this configuration is there are still some restrictions on where we can actually physically provide left turns. Part of that's the center stations, part of that's just the spacing of the intersections and what we can actually work into the design. But we cannot, as existing conditions that are out there now, you have basically a center two-way left turn lane that allows left turns anywhere across the whole corridor. That is not something that we can do in the context of this design. We can still provide strategic left turns where we can fit them in, and we've definitely worked hard to advance the design in that way so that we can mitigate left turn access issues, but we can't have a free flow left turn lane throughout the whole corridor. So that's certainly a con and a reality of this design configuration. Although on the flip side, I would note that there are a ton of left turn lane crashes along the corridor. We've done a safety study along here. Many of the significant property damage, injury, crashes have been a result of left turns and that center two-way left turn lane as it is an existing condition. So, while it's a con for access to have to limit some of those left turns, it is a pro for safety. The other con for this configuration is it does reduce that general purpose traffic to one lane in each direction. And we've certainly heard that concern from folks along the corridor. From a traffic analysis standpoint, again, we talked about what that means from a delay perspective. But the concern also that we've heard is that it will reduce the amount of vehicles that will be on this corridor and the amount of vehicles that will have that will then see businesses along here and have access to it. And we do understand that concern. So then to the next slide, we talked about property impacts. And again, this configuration has the least amount of property impacts on the corridor. And this kind of shows that it's a little small, but if you see the magenta line there on the south side, this is at Washington and Fleming Street, which again, we've looked at an alternate configuration or an alternate station location here, but with the station as shown here, there is a little bit of frontage on the south side of Washington that would need to be acquired to fit in the multi-use path, the station, the left turn, and the travel lanes in each direction. So that's just an example of the type of right-of-way acquisition that is typical for this configuration. It's usually 4 to 6 feet or something like that along the frontage to make sure we can tie in sidewalks and or build the multi-use path. So let's move on to the next configuration. This is the curbside bat. And again, we're looking at the intersection of Washington and Lyndhurst here. And you're starting, we'll go through the colors here quickly on this one. The green dash line indicates this is the bus and turn lane or the bat lane. So you can have the right turns into to drives and intersections along the corridor, as well as having the bus be able to use that lane. The blue rectangles, again, are stations. And what you'll see in this configuration is you don't have the center station anymore. You have those curbside stations. So what happens there is the footprint gets bigger on the outside of the curb lane as far as what property is required at those particular station locations. We talked about the lane configurations between the stations are pretty much a wash as far as footprint. They're all the 5 lanes, so the width is similar. But then once you get to the actual station location, the footprints do vary quite a bit between the alternatives. So this shows how the curbside station locations do require additional property to fit that station footprint in there. And you can see on the southeast corner, you start to see some impacts to parking and the property there. So that's, we'll get into pros, cons, but starting with the pros, what's good about this alternative is it does add that capacity in the outside lane for the right turning vehicles, additional volume, additional traffic. So, in a sense, that does help that throughput volume along the corridor and gives you a little more capacity there. This configurations allows the most flexibility for left turns into businesses. In theory, you could still have that 2-way center left turn lane for much of the corridor and really put in the left turns that folks want to have at side streets, et cetera. That would still be a design decision that would need to be worked out with DPW, but this alternative does give you the most left turn access flexibility. Then jumping to the cons for this configuration, we talked about that. We touched on that footprint a little bit. So the footprint at those station locations, and we talked about the stations that from Morris to Holt, you do end up with bigger footprint and bigger property impacts for this particular lane configuration. And it's up to 67 parcels where we would anticipate having acquisitions, including right now. And we've only laid this out to a conceptual level now, which is 10% design, which does give you a good feel for geometry and footprint. But we are looking at one property that would potentially have an impact to an existing building, which then could potentially, depending on the damages there, could lead to a full take of the property, which is something that, and Jennifer will get into this, is not something that IndyGo wants to do as part of the project. The other con to this alternative, and this is mostly due to right-of-way costs, but also due to the fact that you have 2 stations. Anywhere we have a station along this stretch in this configuration, you're now duplicating a lot of the infrastructure to pay for 2 stations at each of those locations. So the cost is an additional $6 million for this alternative. And then we touched a little bit on the left turns. If you were to leave all the left turns in the corridor, we're really not doing much to help with the current safety concerns along the corridor, with what we're seeing from the left turn crashes. And then if we go to the curbside bat property impacts, what you see on the southeast corner, and again, this is something that we've laid out to 10%, but just the footprint of that station, and then needing to work the multi-use path behind the station, that clips the building on this property here on the southeast corner with the station as shown. And that's a concern for us. It's not something that we're interested in doing. So let's go on to the bidirectional alternative. And I'll start with the colors here. In the bidirectional, what we showed earlier, you have a single lane where eastbound and westbound buses travel in between stations. But when you are actually at a station, you do have to have that lane on either side of the station platform so that transit users can dock going westbound and eastbound off the station, and also so that there are hold points along that bidirectional section where, let's say, an eastbound bus docks at this station, it can wait for the westbound bus to clear that single lane in between stations, come to the station before it proceeds. So you do lose some transit operation reliability with that, but you have to have those hold points at the stations, and we have to have the docking on either side of the station. So then what you see from a footprint standpoint, and we'll talk about this in the cons here in a second, is that footprint gets pretty big when you have to have 2 lanes in each direction for general purpose traffic. You have to have a lane in each direction for the transit vehicle and a turning lane. The pros, we'll go with the pros for this section. It does address that concern along the corridor of having 2 travel lanes in each direction and being able to handle a higher amount of traffic volume through the intersections. It also mitigates left turn issues because in this configuration, we can only allow left turns at the signalized intersections. So from a vehicle safety standpoint, those crashes that are happening in between signalized intersections are mitigated. These left turns are only allowed at signalized intersections, which also flips around and becomes a con. Here in a second, we'll talk about the cons. If we go to that slide, the biggest con that I see there's 2 big ones for this alternative, and to me these are huge. One is this configuration has the most restrictions on left turns for the corridor, and to me that flies in the face of the feedback that we heard in 2018 and 2019 that businesses need to have access to their properties, via side streets, via left turns built into the configuration. And this bidirectional configuration cannot allow left turns across that bidirectional lane, except at signalized intersections. So this configuration is the most restrictive to those left turns being able to access properties along the corridor. So to me, that's a big con. The other one is because of the footprint at the stations. Again, just looking at that west leg of Washington and Lyndhurst, you have the station, you have the bus lane in each direction, you have a left turn lane, and you have 2 travel lanes. And then you're trying to build in sidewalk and multi-use path on either side of the roadway. That width is the largest in the bidirectional configuration, and that gets into property impacts. So we're talking about 101 parcels along a 2-mile stretch that will have property impacts. And we're looking at 8 properties where we're seeing impacts to existing buildings with this conceptual layout, as well as an additional cost of $12.6 million. Most of that is in right-of-way costs. And we'll jump to the next slide and just show, again, conceptual layout, but we're looking at 8 properties where we're into buildings and we have impacts that could lead to full property takes, which is not something we want to get into if at all possible. And then here we're looking at just a summary of some of the characteristics of these configurations. And this is, stuff that we've just been talking through, but the big ones in my mind are the property impacts, the left turn access, and then the project cost and what it means to the project. The left column is the left lane BAT. We call it current configuration, but that's just the one that we've advanced to 30% design. The bidirectional and the curbside are the two configurations that we've looked at in the last 3 to 4 months in more detail. Let's jump to the next slide. What we're looking at as far as next stop, and Jennifer mentioned this earlier, is advancing to 60% design plans. And many of the segments along the Blue Line corridor have been advancing towards that 60% because there's been some level of consensus on the lane configuration to move forward with. Segment 1 has really been, I don't want to say stuck, but we've been holding at 30% because we know there are a lot of people who care about this configuration along this section of the corridor. So we've been waiting for consensus and to move forward with that on this segment. So we're really, we want to get that feedback and make sure that we make a decision that's best for the stakeholders along the corridor, including IndyGo and DPW and FTA and the properties along the corridor before we get that advanced to 60%. Jennifer, anything to add as far as the technical analysis that you want to get into?
No, I don't think so. Thank you, Will. Did a great job going through that. If you've got everything you want to say, I will just now head into feedback. So I really want to thank you all for taking the time to join us and hear about where we're at. I know there was a ton of technical information, so thank you so much for bearing with us over these past 40 minutes or so. It is a very technical process, and it's important to us that we be thorough and transparent with you. And I have found in my years of engineering that, the more information we can share, the better input we get and the better the eventual outcome is. So thank you. We've done a lot of outreach and engagement to get to this point, and we're not going to stop. We want to continue to hear from you. And so thank you for being here to learn about what we analyzed and the potential impacts, positive and negative, that each one could have on our community. I do want to share that, of the many configurations that could have been selected, that left lane BAT, the current configuration, was progressed early on because it provides, in our analysis, the best transit and infrastructure benefit with the least negative impact. But we do understand, as Will said, that there are still questions and concerns, and that's why we've asked our designers to hold and to share this information with you. So when we were asked by the legislature to provide this more in-depth analysis to them, we really were happy to do so, and we wanted to make sure that you all heard about it as well. As we mentioned earlier, though, both of the alternate configurations do exceed our current project budget. So at this point, they remain as analyses only. We're not currently recommending that we modify our current design. That said, we also recognize that you all may have a point of view or information that we've not yet considered. And so we really do encourage your feedback on what we presented here. We want to hear from you so that as we continue the conversations with our legislators, as we continue the conversations with stakeholders and progress our design, we're able to make decisions on a technical level with a full understanding and diversity of those voices. In particular, and Will mention this a couple times, I want you to know that we do strive through our capital investments to enhance and encourage economic investment along each corridor by making prudent investments in line with our community values. And our BRT lines to date have always been designed to minimize private property acquisitions. It's one of the very first things we considered, and kind of one of those, bumpers that we give our consultants as they get started on a design. Two of the configurations, or both of the alternate configurations that Will talked through, have the potential to cause property impacts that are contrary to our past practices. And so we do really want to hear from you about that, and whether that's something you're comfortable with IndyGo kind of proceeding with. These questions that we have listed on this slide here just provide some prompts for areas where your feedback would be especially valuable to us as we continue the design. As a reminder, questions submitted during this meeting are not considered formal comment, although our team will be reading and considering every single thing that you provide to us. If you would like your question or comment to be formally documented, you will need to submit it online through our formal comment form, as Jordan described at the beginning. I'm going to put that information up here on the screen, the QR code, the website address, and the phone number, if you do choose to make a formal comment. And then I'm going to go over to the Q&A here. I'm going to leave this QR code up for a few minutes and then I will turn it off. It looks like we've got about 11 questions answered already, and it looks like we have several that people are working on responding to. Jordan, can everybody see the Q&A, the ones that have been answered? They can see those answers, is that correct? Okay, you're muted, but I saw you nodding your head, so I think we're good.
For our team that shared the answer, they should be able to see it.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I think while people are typing, while our team is typing up some of the answers to the open questions, I'll just share a couple of the ones that have already been answered. And I, encourage you to keep submitting them and we'll keep monitoring. We have scheduled to be done at 6:30, so we have about 15 minutes to chat through some of these. Let's see, questions from Wayne Township. At the present time, Metropolitan School District of Wayne Township, excuse me, at the current time, we use school buses to transport children to and from school. Are there coordination plans for school buses during the various phases of construction? Yeah, thank you for that question, Jeff. Absolutely. That's not something we are at the stage of design to work with you on yet, but absolutely school buses will be considered as we put together the construction plans and its maintenance of traffic. So any road closures, detours, et cetera, are considered the full variety of impacts. So we think about impacts to users of vehicles through the area, but certainly also school buses, our local buses, pedestrians, et cetera. So absolutely we'll coordinate with MSD Wayne Township, but not until we progress a little bit further into the design and get closer to construction. That's when we'll have an idea of what the impacts really will be. So thank you for that question. We have a question about business assistance during construction. Leslie provided an answer to that. We are planning to have a business toolkit, which is something we're putting out as part of the Purple Line. So we'll have it all refined and ready to go for you by the time we get to the Blue Line. We've made improvements upon the ways that we reached out to businesses on the Red Line. I think we just keep getting better every time, every project that we do. So always happy to receive your suggestions and comments and ideas for ways that we can further support you. Let's see, what else do we have?
Should we go to some of the open ones, Jennifer?
Yeah, for sure. Do you have one you want to answer, Will?
I was looking at the construction cycle and how it will be spaced out. This is a question from Todd Cook.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, I want you to answer that if that's okay with you.
Okay, how will the construction cycle be spaced out? Specifically, when will West Washington Street be impacted most? Sure, absolutely. We're not quite there yet, but that will be something absolutely that we communicate out. So once we have the design complete, we put together a projected schedule as our design team in coordination with IndyGo, and we will make a suggestion for how we think the design should, or I'm sorry, how we think the construction should be laid out for which segment should happen when. But it's not until we actually get the contractor on board that we really know how that work's going to play out. So for example, we're getting ready to start construction on the Purple Line, and we're going to be having public meetings in late January or February on that, probably 6 to 8 weeks before the real heavy construction starts. And that's when we really first have the opportunity to talk about how the contractor is going to do the work. And then we proceed through construction to just kind of keep that up to date. Construction is so messy and things change so quickly that it wouldn't do us any good to tell you that information right now. But it will be something that we share out for sure. I hope that answered your question, Todd.
Jennifer, I'll jump on your answer and just say from a high level perspective, what we're anticipating as far as substantial construction years right now are 2025 and 2026. So I wouldn't anticipate that West Washington Street construction would be in both of those years, but it would be likely in one of those years. So either 2025 or 2026.
Thank you, Will. You stayed up high. I got 2 down in the weeds. I hope between the 2 of us, we answered that for you, Todd. Let's see. What changes are there for the 6-lane intersection of Washington, Morris, and Waldemere?
I can take that one, Jennifer.
You have that one off the top of your head. Thanks.
Yeah, I wish I had a plan sheet to just show you while I was talking through this, but essentially it will be realigned. And this is actually based on a study that City of Indianapolis did a few years before the Blue Line project started. So the east leg of Morris and the south leg of Waldemere will be realigned to have a single approach on the south side of Washington Street. So that takes the 6-legged intersection down to a 5-legged. And then on the north side of Washington Street, Waldemere will be one-way northbound only. So it can receive left turns, but there will be no approach southbound on that north leg of Waldemere. And then Morris will be a 2-way travel west of Washington Street. So it kind of takes a 6-legged intersection down to what I would call a 4.5-legged intersection, which is part of why we can help meet the kind of level of service requirements there. Because as it stands right now, as a 6-legged intersection, it's pretty gnarly. So that's what the design looks like there. And again, it would be nice to visualize that. And Troy, I think if there's a way, IndyGo can probably share a plan sheet at that location as it currently stands. But hopefully talking through it helped explain it a little bit.
Great. Thank you very much, Will. Let's see. I think Leslie is typing up an answer about military veterans being able to use the Blue Line. So I will let her finish that one up. Evan Tomlinson asked about us making the slides publicly available following the meeting. Jordan, are we posting this for public viewing? You're muted, don't forget. Oh, do you know you're muted, Jordan? We can't hear you.
I've got to do better.
That's okay.
I believe we will have this this presentation available in some format.
Sounds good. So yes, our IndyGo website is where we post all of that. I assume on the Blue Line section of the website specifically, Jordan?
Yep, indigo.net/Blue Line. Great.
All right. Let's see. I can go back to the answered ones and see if there's anything. The 2 miles of bike path, there was a question about where the bike path will be located. The multi-use path is planned to be along the south side of Washington Street between Morris and Tibbs.
And it is planned to tie into the Eagle Creek Greenway that will come up the south side of Tibbs. I think I saw that question in there too. That was coordinated with DPW and that was the intent.
Great.
We will not be building the Eagle Creek Greenway, but when DPW builds it, the intent is to tie in there, to clarify.
Question about how residents can find out and receive updates during the stages of construction. I already mentioned that we would do kind of a big public outreach campaign prior to construction starting. And then we have many ways in which you can receive information about construction. And if you are interested at Purple Line construction starting up and want to test some of them out now, you can sign up to get weekly email messages. We also put things on our social media accounts. We also put the information on our websites, and we will have office hours where we can meet one-on-one with anyone who has questions or wants to dig into things in more detail. I also expect that we will have a construction liaison like we did on red and we'll have on purple. And that will be somebody on the construction management team who will be able to answer questions, deal with any concerns through construction one-on-one. And you will have that person's phone number and email address, and you'll be able to contact him or her anytime throughout construction with questions or concerns. So lots of different ways that you'll be able to do that. Let's see. Changes, we talked about that one. One thing I wanted to say that I don't remember saying was that we do really appreciate, I noticed here, a couple comments about the things that you do like. We really appreciate hearing that too. And it's not just for our egos, but it does help us, understand what is most important to people. So please don't be shy about sharing feedback. If you are in support of something, if there are certain features that we've shared tonight or things that we've shared tonight that you do like, we want to hear from you as well. So thank you and I see some of you have already done that. Let's see, anything, when will property owners be notified that they're losing property or business or buildings? Thank you for that question. We're a ways off from that. So you will be notified directly if your property and buildings are going to be impacted, but we're not there yet. So I know we shared red blotches on maps. I don't want anyone to panic. When we get to a spot where that information is set, we will absolutely contact you directly immediately. As I mentioned, at this point, we are not recommending that we move forward with the alternate configurations, the ones that would impact buildings or potentially full pieces of property. Because, as I mentioned, it's not something that we have done and it's not something we're really comfortable with. So there are the kind of the slivers of land, the 2, 4, 6 foot kind of widths in order to build sidewalks that Will talked about under the current configuration. That will be communicated probably next summer. But again, under the current configuration, there are no building impacts. So if there is a section where we need a sliver of property in order to widen for a station or to build sidewalks, you will be notified probably around next summer. Will, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Sure, yeah, your next summer timeline is right, and it's contingent upon approval of NEPA, the environmental analysis. So on federal projects, there's a law that you cannot reach out to property owners for property negotiation until that environmental study is completed and approved by FTA. So, and the timeline for that is looking like summer of 2022. So wouldn't expect any reach out to property owners until late summer, early fall of 2022.
And in case any of you are not familiar with that process, there is compensation provided when we acquire sections of property. And then Brandon Fishburne asked whether we have a study that references economic impact on other similar developments. I know those exist. I don't have them at the tip of my fingers. So that's maybe something that we're going to, unless maybe Duffy or Will or Michael have something that they can point to pretty quickly, that might be something we have to get back to folks on. What would be, Jordan, if we do that, given that we're pretty much out of time, is there a way that we can get back to Mr. Fishburne with his?
Yes, his question has been recorded in the chat. If he wants to make that an official public comment, calling our call center or using our online forum, that's another way that we can reach him.
Yeah, that would be, then that way we'd have an email or a phone number in order to respond. So, Okay, well, we've got pretty much out of time. Let me turn it over maybe to Jordan to wrap it up.
Yeah. I just want to say to all of those who spent some time with us this evening, thank you for engaging in this process. Again, we value your feedback, and we want you to continue to engage with us as we progress design and work together to, have more reliable, better transit in the city of Indianapolis. Again, please, if you have an official public comment that you would like to make, visit our website, the online form, or call our customer service. And with that being said, it is 6:30, and you all have a great rest of your holiday.